Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Immersive Tech Talk podcast series presented by VRD HealthTech. I'm Sherry Marion, CEO of VRD HealthTech, and we're so pleased to have our host, Professor Skip Rizzo, who will be engaging in dialogue with various experts in the digital mental health field across the course of the podcast series. Professor Rizzo will interview today's amazing guest, a true pioneer in the field of interactive art and immersive technology, Myron Krueger. Before we start the discussion, let me introduce you to VRD HealthTech. VRD HealthTech is an accelerator for the adoption of immersive technology by partnering with emerging application creators to market, sell, onboard, and train users in health and wellness solutions. We offer these applications to hospitals, clinics, educators, and corporations to benefit their patients, students, clients, and their community. VRD is proud to have the support and guidance from experts in virtual reality, such as our host, Professor Skip Rizzo. Skip Rizzo is a professor at USC and director of medical virtual reality. He serves as an advisor and chief science officer for our partner Cognitive Leap, exploring methods to address attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, in children. Today, we're doing something incredibly special. We're taking a journey into the roots of virtual reality. Not the VR you know from gaming or headsets, but the kind that started with an idea, a camera, and the radical belief that human-computer interaction could be poetic. Our guest today is Myron Krueger, a true pioneer in the field of interactive art and immersive technology. Back in the 1960s and 70s, long before Oculus, Meta, or even the term virtual reality, Myron was designing environments where people could move freely and be seen by the computer, not just through it. His groundbreaking project, Video Place, laid the philosophical and technological groundwork for what we now call VR and AR. But more than that, he's someone who's always asked, what is meaningful interaction? And how can technology deepen rather than dilute human experience? During the interview, our participants who are joining us from the webinar can directly ask a question through the Q&A window, while participants from the YouTube live stream can also ask questions in the live chat. We will have around 10 minutes at the end to ask your questions. So now let's go ahead and turn it over to Skip and Myron.
Okay. Well, thank you for that great introduction, Sherry. And I can't tell you how excited I am to do this interview with you, Myron. I got to say, you were inspirational to me in the very early days when I was making the difficult decision as to whether I was going to stay as a regular clinician doing work in brain injury rehab, or if I was going to make a big decision and try to develop systems myself for clinical applications. And I remember stumbling across an article you wrote in 1993 in the journal Presence. It was called The Experience Society. And that damn article, man, that just tweaked my brain. I gotta say that. And there was a quote in there that I've cited a number of times in papers, and a lot of times I'll bring it up in the middle of a talk, and I just got to read it now because it was inspirational and got me really excited about what we could do as we move forward in the future. It goes, virtual reality arrives at a moment when computer technology in general is moving from automating the paradigms of the past to creating new ones for the future. And that was like the license to move forward. And then I think it was, now I'm dating myself, I think it might have been 97, Ben Delaney's VR Universe, or I think it was around that time. I think Galen Brandt introduced us, and it was like, oh my God, this is the guy that wrote that article. And I was all nervous. But then talking to you, it was like you could talk the language of VR, not just, who was doing what, but the conceptual language. And it was inspirational for me, and I've carried it with me for a long time. And we've run across each other over the years here and there. But that's why I'm so excited, because it's like a pivotal person in my VR experiences. So, all right, with that sappy introduction, let's move on. You know, when you were writing that article, because that was in the beginning days when that journal, I think it was the second volume of the journal Presence. What were you thinking at that time when, when you did that?
Oh, I was thinking you'd find language almost identical to that in the first draft of my dissertation in February 1972. In other words, I'd been thinking that way for a long time. And I thought that somebody would pick up on it then. It turned out that took a lot of door knocking before anybody responded at all. And sometimes they would respond, and I'd be so surprised that I would go on as if nothing, as if nobody answered the door because of my expectations.
Well, so okay, how did let's go back to the beginning. What was your inspiration? What was your interest? How did your interest in interactive art and computer graphics begin? Because back then nobody was really doing anything like that. How?
Well, it started because I was always interested in interactive computing, going back to 1963, where I was in one of the first basic courses at Dartmouth. Uh, and it was in the Army, and I was in grad school, and everything was batch processing, which meant punch cards. And I resolved very quickly that I would not stand for this. And so I resolved to take computers standalone, 101, mono a mono, be in the computer. And so I found after years of doing things like taking the main university mainframe standalone at night, I found that there was a computer in the hospital called a Link computer. And it had input and output, and it had a display. You could do word processing on it. It was fabulous. So I started, focusing on interactivity with that and used it in some of my first shows. But what I really resented about the intellectual life of the human race is that it forced you to sit down. It forced you to be inactive. There was this tension. You were either a physical person or you were a reader. And I was a bit of both. And so I wanted my body back. And so my first interest was in, could I involve myself interactively with the computer, but with my whole body, not just a mouse or a keyboard or a joystick or anything like that. And so I was thinking about how to make that happen. And there was an art exhibit project, a group project with about 30 people involved. And Dan Sandine was a principal in that. And I knew him from working with graphics, which I was a programmer on a computer graphics system. And so we did a project which had beautiful art environment, but minimal interactivity. And even that limited interactivity, the main visual artist didn't want to use because it would interfere with the experience of the artwork as he saw it. And so I saw that then really the interactivity should become the focus of a form of art. And so I would say had lines like response is the medium. And so I thought about how to make interactivity real. And I hit on this idea from using that example and completely turning it upside down, that interactivity would be, a system would have to know as much about what you were doing as possible. and to dominate your perception as much as possible. And so that would be sort of the ultimate Skinner box where, all the inputs, all the outputs are either generated by you or provided by the computer. And so that's what I decided the best way of analyzing person's behavior was a video camera. But I didn't have anything the computer couldn't do that for me. So I faked it. I did what I called then the Wizard of Oz interface. And so people would come into an art gallery, they'd see themselves on a projection screen, and they'd see something on the screen generated by a computer, apparently. But in fact, it was me operating an interactive graphics program on the computer a mile away in the computer center.
You know what? I have a video, an old video. Why don't we pop this up? Because, it's about an application you developed called Video Place, and it really is the precursor to modern VR, the foundational elements of exploration in real time, intuitive human-computer interaction. It's had an effect on motion tracking, gesture recognition. I mean, it was so far ahead of its time. I think it deserves a little clip here. So here we go.
Myron Krueger of the Ars Electronica Corporation is credited with being the first computer researcher to find a way into the virtual world. His video place has become a meeting point for reality hackers. Imagine becoming your own shadow and being able to interact with other people's shadows in a simulated space, to touch them and to be touched. Krueger's aim is to create just such a shadow world where people can relate to each other in a way quite impossible in the physical realm.
This is the evolution that prepared us for seeing ourselves on television screens combined with computer images. But also, one of the main attractions is the juxtaposition of large and small. So that people will now interact and to some extent discover what the possibilities are, what is suggested emotionally by scale. And this is part of general video play concept of people getting together in the artificial reality. In other words, what's happening now between the two people is that we're now interacting in a way that humans have never could.
A person's outline is projected on any movement forces the computer to react using a little green digital character called the critter.
And the critter has all sorts of different behaviors, and I play with them as if you were a graphic text. And it's designed to tell you about this sort of artificial world that we're entering. He's the first step, a playful creature who will come out and engage you in a new kind of play. Your body now is interacting on the screen.
Krueger sees scientific applications for the critter. For instance, it could be used in the treatment of autistic children.
The idea is that an autistic child doesn't want to interact. And most important, doesn't want to interact with people. But that's the most upsetting thing. Now, in this system, I can focus the computer on his behavior so that no matter how small his behavior, I can respond to it. And I can lead him into larger and larger behaviors. So there's no way he can withdraw. There's no possibility of not interacting.
This is artificial reality as well. It's artistic side, body surfacing.
Moment by moment, you're creating something beautiful, but that beautiful thing changes so that you have to keep moving. And you don't think about sitting back and looking at the result because you can create something equally beautiful the next 10 seconds. Being involved and thinking about it instant by instant, capturing it and hanging it on the wall.
Okay. I'm sorry if that was a little jumpy on the audio. Sometimes with Zoom, it's a lot smoother in its normal presentation. But anyway, so, when you think about where VR has come from that time. There's such a large focus on headsets, on the immersive element of it. What was your view back then, and how has it changed at all? Because I know, you didn't really see the headset as the essential part. The video place was really about interactivity.
Well, I considered a headset because I'd read the Sutherland paper in '69, and I thought I could build it. I'm glad I didn't try, but uh, it would have been a little harder than I thought. But I felt that the headset would be distancing. In other words, if I go into an experience and now I got to change what I'm wearing, by the time I've done all that, uh, it's a huge investment. So I'm not going to do it very often. And whereas I preferred the idea, partly for practical presentation reasons, that having wires and everything would be a problem in a gallery setting, but also that it was more of a surprise if you walked in a room and all of a sudden you were interacting with something in some completely unexpected way. If you had to don the gear, adjust it, and all of this, and had verbal instructions about what to do, that detracted from the experience, I felt. And then, go ahead.
Well, you built this stuff at a time when there was no technology. You had to build it pretty much from scratch. When you look at things like, the Microsoft Kinect, or now some of the single camera tracking systems, or the way that you can track your hand movements from a headset, what do you think you could have built if you had access to the technology that we have today?
Oh, well, I did see sort of a quantum leap in computer vision. I had the first computer vision system that did anything in real time. But then the problems got harder if I wanted to go into three-dimensional gestures. We did a little bit of that, but it was also whether the three-dimensional would actually help that much wasn't clear. And since what's happened since is it's used for one part of the experience or the other. I do think that one thing that might not occur to people is that in video place, you have an avatar which is immediately identifiable, and you're working in the third person. Things happen to your avatar, and you feel they happen to you. If you're in a totally immersive system, you see what's happening out there, but you don't necessarily see it happen to you. And some video games, like if there's a crash, will switch from first person, where you're immediately immersed, back to third person to watch your car wreck or something like that, because it can't really convey without real pain what it feels like to get shot in a video game.
So, we're talking about working with the technology that was available in the 70s, 80s, early 90s. What did people think when you would show this, when a novice would come? I mean, this is a very common thing now when somebody puts on a VR headset for the first time and they turn their head and look around, all of a sudden you see their jaw drop, and there's sort of a characteristic response. What did people think back then? And I mean, how did you explain this to people when you were still building it, like what you were aiming for?
Well, I didn't explain because nobody knew I was doing it exactly. I drew a little block diagram and on what the system had to be, and then I spent 15 years building it, and building not just computer vision, but the computer vision included specialized computers. And these computers could operate in concert. They were all different computers, and they could operate 10,000 times as fast as a regular computer could. So I had, the advantage of being able to look forward and do things that were not possible for anybody. And part of that was there was an orthodoxy that if you did multiple computing, they all had to be identical. Whereas I knew that the human brain had lots of specialized structures in it. And so I felt completely comfortable with the idea I'd have different kinds of computers. But I became pretty, even though I had no electronics or digital background, I became pretty good at, coming up with an idea and then building the hardware to do it. But there was a secret I could do it on my own time, and then I could hire student labor for 25 cents an hour and the work study program. So I designed about 50 boards. I never got to test all of them. But, so that was one of my secret weapons.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how did who funded this work then? I mean, was this all GarageBand?
I had a few, a little bit of funding from the Wisconsin Arts Board. I had a little funding from a program that had gone defunct, but was aptly named the Communication Environments Program. I don't know what that meant. That was maybe $4,500. I went to Washington to try to promote the idea. I trick-or-treated around every office in the government, and finally went to the one place that I knew would say yes, the Japanese embassy. They said that if I could get it on our end, that they would definitely participate. And I was proposing to do it video plays with satellites. So people in Japan would interact physically with people in America in real time and displayed on national television and in Washington, D.C. And one of those formats was going to be Zoom, what we're doing now. I had an image with 16 people on the screen, and each with a little beanie indicating where they were. And so I thought, the idea for that part of it was people would go into this studio, interact, talk with people, and find out where, what's it like what's the weather like in Arkansas, or what's the weather like in Hawaii or Japan or whatever. But that was my one shot. I had just gotten my final oral the day before. I flew to Washington. I did get offered 2 jobs. One was the one I had to take at the University of Wisconsin, the Space Science Center, and the other was in the White House Office of Telecommunication Policy. I didn't know until later that day what the job was, because Nixon resigned.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
What did you think when you saw people doing similar kinds of things with caves, like what was going on at EVL with Dan Sandine's work and the communication aspect?
Well,
and so
Dan
on?
and I had worked together on Low Flow, so I knew him well. And I actually taught a course where I taught him to program. That it was a course outside the university for artists. And so he was, I've lost my thought here.
With Dan, with the cave stuff.
Oh, okay, the cave. He came up to see video, the first version of Metaplay, it was called. And we were sitting in it with one end of the room, a projection screen. And I had another projector and another projection screen. What I didn't have was another graphics machine. And so we were saying, it's obviously what we want to do next. And neither of us thought of it. We both, it seemed obvious that what we wanted was a cave.
Right.
But it took years, before either of us could do it. I was trying to do a cave at the same time, but I didn't have a state government behind me. And I was trying to get Mitsubishi or Mitsushi, don't remember which one, to sponsor it. And because I had done a big demonstration with VPL. And so I thought they might be interested. And I had done an ad for Mitsubishi, I think, TV.
Well, if, when you think about VR now, and I just want to introduce this question, then I have a little surprise here. Do you see VR more as an artistic or a technological medium?
I think it is a technology, and it has artistic potential. And I don't, like the punch card was invented to control a loom to make fancy fabrics. And so the idea that art and technology are permanently estranged, have never bought. Lost wax casting in ancient Greece was as high tech as it got. And Da Vinci was there's a museum in Milan, which is the inventions of Da Vinci. It's just models of what he drew, made technical drawings of. So, and in the Renaissance, painters didn't go down and get tubes of paint. They made their own pigment. And they would experiment with different binders. And sometime a painting would just melt because they guessed wrong on what the ingredients should be.
Well, on that question, I have a little surprise for you.
Okay.
I've invited somebody to join us that I think kind of well represents the artistic side of VR as well as the virtual healing side. So, do we have our little friend here? Sherry, is she going to pop in?
He is supposed to be coming in. I
Here we
believe
go.
right here.
Here
Yeah,
we go.
he is.
Hi, Galen.
Hey, Myron.
Good to see you. This is the original Tiny Dancer. And I should say of the Tiny Dancer part, that was done without Galen. That was done with a sort of a stick figure because we were exhibiting at the IBM gallery and we only had part of the hardware. So Galen was a much better dancer than that.
Oh, thank you. About setting a low bar.
So let me just introduce for the audience here, Galen Brandt, who's I met, I think it was the mid 90s. I think it was San Jose. I think it was Ben Delaney's conference, VR Universe. And it's amazing when I think back to those days. You remember Rebecca Allen? She was a digital media artist, and she had an exhibit at the museum there. We ended up taking her exhibit. It was called the Bush Soul, and converting it into a head mount display application in 2002 to use at Children's Hospital for kids that were terrorized by getting needle sticks or IV insertions. And we converted that incredible piece of work that she had built as an art piece for interaction, similar to, things you'd been doing for, 15, 20 years prior. And that was sort of my step into seeing, well, these art folks, they got some good stuff here. Maybe we've got to really look at this because, part of our goal here is to engage people in healthcare related applications. So, Galen, why don't you, tell us a little bit about your history, and then we'll carry on with a little three-way conversation with Myron.
Will do. So, hi, everybody. I am a storyteller. I'm a performer and a songwriter and a writer. And I was onto a story in the early 90s because I had been introduced to VR. And I was convinced that it was a uniquely transformative technology and that moreover, it had a potential to heal that I had never seen in a technology. So I was doing a little investigative work and I went to Intermedia in 1991 and there was a man standing in a room and talking about his work, and on a screen above his head, he was showing something that he called Tiny Dancer in my hand. And it was a little silhouette and two large hands. And they were having a virtual relationship that was impossible, unlike anything I had ever seen. And my heart exploded. And I walked up to him after the talk, was of course Myron. And I said, hi, I don't know how you're doing what you're doing. And I'm not that tiny, and I am not a dancer, but I am Tiny Dancer. Myron said, well, and was gracious enough to talk to me for long enough that I guess he decided I wasn't completely out of my mind any more than he was. And then I pestered him, literally pestered him, kind of uncharacteristically, for a long time after that. I kept calling up saying, so Myron, you got a conference coming up. You got a Tiny Dancer? And finally he said, okay, SIGGRAPH, Chicago. Can you be there in 2 days? And I said, you bet. And I had an ecstatic week being Tiny Dancer and spline person and rocket person and all of his extraordinary personae. And it was an ecstatic experience that changed my life, truly. And the rest is history. Thank you, Myron.
Thank you.
So, I don't want to stroll too far down memory lane here, but I think, we've all kind of come up, during a period when, we thought VR could do much more. We didn't realize how long it would take for the technology to catch up with the vision. But back in the 90s, who were some of the people that you all interacted with? We mentioned Dan Sandine. Who were some of the other folks that you had interactions with that actually fell in line with the view that this was more than just a gaming technology? This was something that was emotionally evocative, could be ways to bring people together. Can you think of some folks?
Well, I didn't do as much collaboration because I always was concerned that I would get consumed by the process. But for instance, there was a guy, Steve Hemanover, who ran a laser company. And SIGGRAPH 92 or something, I did a piece called Step Lightly. And it was a 16 by 16 foot carpet with 4,000 handmade pressure sensors under it. So the computer knew where you were standing, or if there were multiple people, where they were. And there was a laser projector 30 feet above, and it projected a fish on the floor. And the fish would move, chasing you as you stepped onto the floor. And it was extremely fast and extremely funny. And we found that, people would invent ways of interacting with it. And we even had a little baby who was crawling, and they crawled after the fish. And we made the fish bigger, and they crawled away from it. And so, we could tell that we could get emotional reactions. Now, making a baby cry is not, but we could evoke curiosity and interest and behavior. And that's what we wanted, was the raw ability to do that. And there were a lot of people we talked about interacting with, collaborating with. And Galen's the only one I did long term. But it was, Peter Gabriel wanted me to do something on a project in Britain. And he wanted me to also work with Laurie Anderson. In both cases, I thought they were too busy to collaborate with me. Even though they didn't say that, they wanted to do it. But even when I visited Peter Gabriel, he was busy the whole time, had maybe an hour for me. But there were lots of ideas about making it more address the evocative side. Dorothy Strickland was a friend of Galen's and wanted me to work with her on autism. And I did work on blindness. I did work on range of motion theory. I did maps for the blind, but I was not confident that I could make it, that I could solve the autism problem. And I didn't want to do something, there were so many things that I knew I would succeed at, that doing something where I wasn't confident I could succeed at made me a little bit of a wimp. And so we didn't do a proposal on that.
Well, what you did do though was inspire people, because now autism is a big area where VR is making a difference, and it does rely a lot on camera-based tracking systems that I think were really inspired, like things that make it so that kids can interact with each other to teach social skills, different ways of tracking facial expression, different activities that foster an embodied cognition approach. So, everything that you did in the early days, really, as it evolved and grew, is translated into almost like a common practice now.
Okay, that's interesting. I haven't been paying as much attention as I should have, but I had, I believe I did work with United Cerebral Palsy, and took it down to the center in Long Island, and we worked with their patients, and it was extremely successful with them. Now, it engaged them. I mean, they were wildly enthusiastic. Traumatic brain.
Yes.
I had somebody bring out a really big guy in a wheelchair. And for about 2 hours, he sat in his wheelchair, but he was so tall, he could interact with the whole screen. And his mother said, I don't know if you can tell, but that was joy on his face. And it was similarly, there was a little boy, Dimitri, in Long Island, and all he could move was his finger. And so we made it so his finger could shoot.
Yep.
And he was thrilled. And so we did proposals on that sort of thing, and they were all shot down, formal proposals. Also on range of motion therapy for mentally challenged people, they got it, they loved it. For the elderly, they loved it. But, there was not the openness in the research world to allow me to pursue it. I did what I could on my own time, but I could only do that for a while.
Well, when the Kinect came out, the Microsoft Kinect, we had been doing stuff in physical therapy with that, developing applications to try to make the very boring, repetitive, and frustrating activities of PT after a stroke or a traumatic brain injury or whatever, make it more fun and engaging. And we had done just what you had mentioned. The Cerebral Palsy Foundation had given us a small grant, and basically the ask was, make it so that kids with severe motor impairments could play video games, because they couldn't operate, hand control and have the dexterity. And I've got this great video of this little girl, and pretty much the only movement that she had good volitional control was picking her arm up like this. And we built a whole set of games around her body being the interface. And it was a complete ripoff of Video Place and the stuff that you had inspired so many people on in that early work. But, it was just, it translated. That was probably around, the Kinect came out, I think, 2010. And it was probably 2011, 12. And I remember seeing the joy on this little girl's face.
Expired.
Yeah, right. All right, let me bring up another name from the past, because I think this ties into some of the key elements about where we're going here with the VR stuff, and that is Rita Addison.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, believe it or not, I just showed video clips of her application from 1994. She did it with Marcus Tiebo, called Brain Deconstruction Ahead.
It's Detour, Brain Deconstruction Ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Galen, you want to describe it real quick?
Rita was a psychologist and photographer, and she had a car accident and suffered brain damage. And she felt that she was broken invisibly on the inside, and that she could not explain to anyone, even her doctors and her closest intimates, what her world was now like. But she had heard that virtual reality had the potential to engender empathy, that you could step into a virtual reality and thereby into the experience of another. So she created an installation called Detour Brain Deconstruction Ahead. You stepped into a hallway and it was lined with Rita's photographs. And you could see them. They were beautiful photographs of nature and so on. You could hear birds chirping. And then you were in a car, you were behind a windshield, and rain and wind, and you were suddenly pitched through that windshield. There was a woman's scream. And then you saw neurons, what looked like neurons, crackling and sputtering. And you heard a man's voice say, "I think she's going to have brain damage." And then you're back in the gallery. You're walking down the same gallery for photographs, but now the photographs are distorted horribly. They're blobby and they run down the walls, and there are horrible clanking sounds. And then you exit. The whole thing takes about 3 minutes. And I can tell you that when I stepped out of Detour, I was weeping.
Is he one of the old? I mean, Chris Milk said, describe VR as the ultimate empathy machine, and I think there's some truth to that, as well as being the ultimate experience machine. But empathy is one of the positive byproducts, and it's grown since Rita's seminal work in 1994 with Marcus Tiebo. That was at EVL, Electronic Visualization Lab. And that kicked off a whole bunch of stuff. I don't know if you ever saw the Janssen Pharmaceutical app about what it's like to be in the mind of a schizophrenic that's lost their medication. They're navigating through a drugstore and faces are coming out of the aisles, and people have done this. I actually presented this last week in Hong Kong. I went through about 8 different applications, starting with Rita and her second app, Una, in Sweden, Life After a Stroke, and then all the way up going through Jeremy Bailenson work on what it's like to become homeless, growing up Black in America, having Alzheimer's, and even Excedrin, the pain medication. They sponsored the development of a kind of an augmented reality experience of what it's like to have a migraine and all the perceptual experiences that go on before. You get everything but the pain, but it's the ultimate empathy builder. In the video clip, you see people taking this headset off and hugging their loved one that suffers from chronic migraines. And it's like, this is the power that we have in VR, aside from all the direct practical treatment stuff, but to put a person in the experience of another person. And this whole idea of empathy is just such a powerful tool. And I think, Rita's work, informed early on by your work, Myron, and so on, I think it really kicked off a whole area in VR that doesn't get the marquee representation, but I think it's just as important as many of the other areas we've all worked in.
And Myron,
the article, go ahead.
Oh, please, Myron.
The article that Skip mentioned earlier was, and I think it might have been either in Presence or Communications, the ACM, and it was included in that article, I think, was something where I talked about interactive parables, where you would be in a story, which would be your department, and it would make you make an ethical decision and actually physically make it. And whereas normally you just talk about it, whereas this would be something where you might help somebody or not help somebody. And so it would teach ethics as behavior, not as talk. And so, and there's another thought about in video games were mentioned earlier. Is that all VR is for? Well, if in a video, if you have all you have is a button, all you can do is shoot. However, if you have a body and you in a video game were to kill somebody, and that character's mother was to come out and start wailing in grief, and then start scolding you for killing their son, I think that could change the whole morality, the whole awareness of morality. People play video games, don't think about it at all now, but it'd be a way of making them think about, do I really get a kick out of this, and should I? So that's all of it.
So Galen, you were going to say something? You had a point on this?
Your technology, Myron, is so deeply benign in the sense that it's beneficent. You know, I saw the joy that people experienced. I saw a woman in a wheelchair in video place who could just move this way, and she was flying, and we flew together. And for the first time, I think she saw her own possibilities, and I saw them too. I saw both her limitations and her losing of her limitations and what was possible for her. Or I saw two men come in suits, drop their suitcases, and become spline person and roll on the floor playing together. Talk about a joyful interaction that says what's possible when two people play together. Two
Yep.
The name of the first show that I did by myself was Metaplay.
And the power of play to engender empathy and joy is extraordinary. And your work is so playful as well as poetic. And that's a lot of its profundity. I've never encountered such a playful technology.
Okay, we're like, I think 3 minutes from Q&A, but I've got a question I ask all the panelists. So Galen, since you joined us, you'll have to answer this too. All right, if you were just starting out today and you had unlimited funding, what kind of VR project would you pursue? You had all the money, you could do whatever you want. What kind of stuff would you do?
Music theater using video plays. No question.
Modern day video plays.
Yep. Actually, it could be all day video plays. Suited the purpose perfectly.
What about you, Myron? Do you have a special interest? I know you were studying scent and olfaction for a while.
Yeah, a couple of years. And I mean, olfaction was easy. It was, we did a wireless olfactory delivery system with 16 odors. And I even thought about using it for deafblind people. And so I would do what I was imagining was a art form akin to music, where the scents would come in rhythms and you go back and forth between one smell and another. And I actually called the Helen Keller Institute, but they wouldn't talk to me. But it was, just another place where you could use it. But I had to have, at that time, I had to have encumbrance because I wanted to have, there's a problem with scent, which is you got to get rid of it.
Right.
I wanted to have the possibility of rapid scent delivery. I mean, it's not hard to have one smell, but I wanted to be able also to mix smells. And so it was very encumbering.
Yeah. Do you remember Jackie Mori? She had built a
Yeah,
scent
I know she
collar.
did something to color.
Yeah, yeah.
The thing
Huh.
is that scent would linger in the environment.
Right. There's a company, and I'm blanking on their name, but they've built a thing. It's like a little Snickers bar size object that you can put under a headset. And I think they have 12 cents, and they blow out little micro blasts of water-based scent so that the user gets that quick dose, that quick experience. And it kind of sticks if you have the visual content that goes with it, and it dissipates quickly, and you can shift from one smell to the other. I did one of their demos where it was a camping trip, and you walk by the fireplace, by the fire pit, you smell the wood burning, they bring out a pan, there's bacon cooking, you smell that, you walk by a pine tree. And, the sense of smell is really powerful. We experimented with it for a bit on the PTSD work. But like you say, clearing out the room, using multiple scents, not having it stick to your clothes. We weren't able to get past that at the time, but I think we're going to revisit it with these smaller devices. Okay, so I think we're at the point. Do we have some questions from the audience, or should we just keep babbling?
Yeah, I wanted to just say that we can open it up now for some questions and answers.
Sure.
So as a reminder, participants joining from the webinar can directly ask a question through the Q&A window, while participants from the YouTube live stream can also ask questions in the live chat. So feel free to send in your questions. In the meantime, I have kind of a question for both Myron as well as for Galen, which would be, with all that you have been involved with in terms of the interactive art and the creative, has VR and AR actually, how is it different? I mean, in terms of current day now, how is it different than what you envisioned?
Well, haven't been following it as much as one would expect, but I have tested the commercially available headsets, and there's certainly better resolution, faster response. There's still something missing, and I actually think that VR has been held back by its being synonymous with the head mount, and the head mount has been considered to be synonymous with VR. There's currently Meta has a product which is the something band glasses, and there's a camera in them, and you could feed the camera.
Right, the Ray-Bans, yeah.
Ray-Ban, that's it. And that is so the idea that a head mount could be used for something other than VR, which is what I always thought it would be. I wanted to use it to look at giant schematics. I wanted to have, it just is very low resolution, but for GPS. So I could ask, where's the next, where's a gas station, or where's a bookstore or a subway station? And it would just give me an arrow on the screen. The idea that people are using these tiny little cell phone screens that and somehow typing, my hands shake too much. I can't type on a keyboard. I mean, about 50% of the letters are correct, but it's that a minimal use of the head mount would then create a market for low-end head mounts, and that would start to meet the needs of the high-end head mounts. Because what's happened is display technology has gotten better and better outside of VR. I mean, I've seen a lot of people with 3 giant screens. I started doing what I wanted to do with VR, or what I would want to do with a cell phone. And a cell phone, what's the cost and the weight, the display and the battery? Get rid of the battery, get rid of the display, and you don't need as much battery, and you lose all that weight. So it would be.
So, Galen, did you have any additional comments that you want to make?
Me?
Galen?
I am convinced that we most love those around whom we get to be a self that we love being. And when I was in video place, I fell in love with those machines because I got to be a self that I loved being, that was otherwise impossible. I got to be a tiny dancer in a relationship, an intimate relationship with those hands, and be infinitely regenerated. I got to explore play. I got to be an amoeba. I got to be all of those things. And truly, when the machines were taken away, I'm going to sound like I weep all the time, but I would weep because it was like a lover going away with whom I could be myself in a unique way. And I have never found, maybe it's my limitation, I have never found another virtual reality experience that equaled that profound, allowed me that profound exploration of self and of relationship and of what I call fables of consequence. For example, what happens if you choose to play with someone who allows you to regenerate? What happens if you choose to play with someone and you can become one creature, one amoebic creature? What happens if you can fly with someone who's disabled and sense their joy?
Sounds pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, that, I think the whole area of disabilities, that's what drew me into the field to begin with. I remember seeing Dean Inman's work where he had built a system for training children that had physical disabilities on how to operate a motor vehicle, essentially a motorized wheelchair. And I remember seeing that in 1994 at VR and Persons with Disabilities conference where I met Walter Greenleaf also, by the way. I think it was 93. And he showed a video of this kid he's on his wheelchair that he was going to be able to get if he could pass, the training, and it was motorized and they were on rollers and they had the kid navigating through mud, crossing streets, doing all the functional things. But the thing that was the reinforcement at the end was the kid could fly off into the clouds. And that sensation of flying without it being too provocative to, make you get a little motion sick or whatever. But that kid, I remember seeing this video of this kid flying through the clouds, being able to do something he wasn't going to have the opportunity to do on his own otherwise. And it was so reinforcing of the experience and the activity that they were trying to help the kid learn.
And
So I was hooked.
Well, we have a couple questions that are coming in, and I'd like to go ahead and provide those. One is from, it says, thank you so much for exploring these wonderful early days of VR with us. Having experienced both waves of VR, 1990s and 2010s and 2020s, how do you think the broader public sentiment regarding VR has changed or evolved?
I think that the unfortunate thing is that VR has not taken off like a rocket yet, and I think it's still that it's too cumbersome. And I think that if there was a lightweight version of it that was absolutely minimal, I think it might sell, and it might be practical, and it might cost much less. And you could, if you found a killer app with such a device, then you could build up and up and up and have a better and better system each year, and then and maintain the same price point. Then you might be able to sell millions. But what we're proving now is if you start at 3,500, people are not going to clamor to buy it.
Yeah, like the Apple Vision Pro. That's
Exactly.
the price point for that. It's a great piece of equipment, but it's a little bit out of the reach for most people. I think it's really got to be like these, like a pair of glasses. And, if I had the unlimited money, what I would do is I would build an augmented reality app called Augmented Morality. And what it would be is you walk through a mall and you look, and the cameras would pick up the logo of a store, and then what would pop up, either audio or a listing, their social responsibility, the company's social responsibility, what political campaigns that they donate to, what's their carbon footprint, how much over the minimum wage do they pay, and then people could make their buying decisions based on how ethical that company was. That to me would be a way to change the world, aside from all the mental health and rehab stuff. But anyway,
Do it, Skip. Do it.
maybe we should all partner on that.
All right. Well, I think we are just about near the end of our time, Skip. Does that sound about right?
Last words, anyone?
I have a final question for Myron. Is that all?
Okay.
I just happen to have a book here that might be familiar to you, Myron.
Yeah.
See this, folks? It's Myron's book, Artificial Reality, which is the classic, folks. I'm going to read you your last paragraph. When I look at a powerful new technology, I see it as an expression of natural laws, a new vocabulary, and a new syntax added to humankind's repertoire. As I anticipate its impact on 100 applications and foresee its effects rippling through human culture and human nature, I feel a sensation not unlike the one stirred by contemplating the cosmos on a starry night. Upon seeing my work at a conference in Boston, one woman sat down, sighed, and said, "It's so joyful." I thought, that's what I meant. So Myron, my question for you is it that creating and offering us joy, cosmic healing joy, that has really animated your work all these years?
Well, it was. There were multiple levels. There was the joy of discovering what I thought was a earth-shaking idea. The joy of when something new would work. Sometimes something very difficult. It took me a long time. Sometimes it'd be something that took a half hour. One of the flow drawing things where you automatically synchronize your rate of drawing with a repeating of this pattern through time. And so there were things that was maybe an hour's work. But the joy of discovery, I had hoped the joy of changing the world. And I thought the idea, what I said somewhere else in the book was virtual reality technology may not change the world, but the idea already has. And it is now how we think. In other words, we talk about the virtual world. John Perry Barlow said, virtual reality is where your money is. And I had made the same statement, but not as poetically. I mean, he said it much better than I tried to say it. And I said something about money being in the air all around you. But it was that pleasure that I might have that these ideas that I was privileged to have sole possession of for a little while were going to be earth-shaking, and that might and someday reorganize the world. I still think that can and will happen. It's just we have to figure out how to get there. And I think there's two ways to go at it: from the top down or the bottom up. I would, after 55 years, I would advocate going from the bottom up.
Thank you so much for your insight, both of you. And thank you to all of you who have joined us today for this episode of Immersive Tech Talk. I hope you've enjoyed our amazing guests today as much as I have, both Myron Krueger and Galen Brandt. And thank you again to our incredible host, Skip Rizzo. So for our audience, the video recordings of this event will be available on our YouTube channel. So please feel free to share it with anyone who might be interested in the topic. We look forward to seeing you again at our next event and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again.